All right, my cell phone is never wrong on the time. It's wrong in a lot of other ways, but it says it's 7 o'clock, so I'm going to go with that. It's time to get started this evening. I've got some announcements here. I'm still trying to get used to procedures. I think I'm a little close to that mic, but I'm not sure what to do about it. Let me tear it up. Okay. I wouldn't mind if it was. But anyway, we have a few announcements here. Don Slocum passed away early this morning. Arrangements are being made. I guess we're waiting on notification of that. Jan Sullivan is doing better and is scheduled to go home Friday. Jonathan Torkelson is recovering from surgery, and Don Powell, father of Jeremy, is home recovering from hip replacement surgery today. So those are the ones that I have. Is there any other breaking news here? Marshall Brown? What? Okay, Marshall's having some. Okay. All right, so we want to remember Marshall as well as those that we've had on the announcement page. Anything else? If not, we'll go to our Father in prayer. Our Father and our God, we thank you so much for the blessings that you give us each and every day. Father, we realize that there are those here who are suffering from physical infirmities and recovering from surgeries, and we certainly do so much want to remember the family of Don Slocum, who has passed away today. And Father, we pray that you would be with each of us each and every day and help us to be supportive of one another. And we look to you for healing, for guidance, and for all the blessings of life. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen. All right, well, we're going to begin a series of lessons on the book of Ezekiel. It seems the idea is that the congregation has not much had very many lessons from the Old Testament, and it'd be a good idea to maybe have some more of that. And quite frankly, you can't really truly understand the New Testament without understanding the Old Testament. And it's not just the messianic prophecies and looking forward to the coming of Jesus, but it's also the understanding of how God thinks and how he reacts and what he expects of people and all those things. So Ezekiel is a study that I've done in classes like this before over the years, a couple of times at least. And in eternity, I want to meet Ezekiel. He is a special individual, and if you've ever spent much time in the book, you will know exactly what I'm talking about. His name means God strengthens. You know, El as in Elohim, God, like Bethel is house of God, okay, the place, the city. Ezekiel means God strengthens. And as we see what he was up against, we know he is going to absolutely and really did need strengthening, but God said he would be good for it, and he would take care of it. Ezekiel was a priest. He was of the tribe of Levi, the lineage, at least in a general way, the lineage of Aaron, and he was a priest. But God had in mind him being more than just a priest. He had in mind him being a prophet, and so he quickly added that to his resume. God called him to be a prophet in 593 BC. Now, to tell you the truth, talking about calendars like that can be a great way to put people to sleep, but I just want to say that that's kind of an anchor point. That's when he was called. He was 30 years old and in Babylonia with the exiles there. The Babylonian captivity had already started. Daniel had been taken, he had been deported to Jerusalem, 5 years before God called him. So he had been in Babylonia for 5 years. Daniel had been taken in the first wave of captives, exiles, 8 years before that in the first deportation. And to tell you the truth, Scott did a great job a couple of weeks ago in here in this class of giving us a good overview and synopsis of Ezekiel and some things that are important about his ministry, and then an application, for the modern times. And he mentioned at the time, and I'll just say it again, the Babylonian captivity wasn't a just cut and dried, very simple thing. There were 3 deportations of Jews from Judah to the Babylonian Empire, Babylonia itself, and there were 3 returns. So, but the 70 years seems to be clearly counted from the first deportation, in which Daniel and his friends were part of. And then it's 70 years until Zerubbabel returns with the first of the captives to be repatriated to Palestine. So there were 3 deportations, and then there were 3 repatriations. Three times they brought captives over, and 3 times they went back, roughly 70 years apart. It's important for us to see the interplay and understand the interplay between the prophets. Jeremiah was in Judah prophesying and in preaching and calling the people to repent there in Jerusalem and all of Judah. And Ezekiel was with the captives there in Babylonia, but he was the man on the street. He was with the common people. And of course, who was the other prophet that was there? But he was in the king's palace, and he was an administrator, really. Okay, Daniel. Daniel. So we think about Daniel's ministry was so very different from that of Ezekiel, because he was in the king's palace. He was involved in the administration of the state, really, in the state affairs. Very powerful individual, and Ezekiel was out in the streets with the common people, but God had it set up so that he had all the bases covered. The people were being preached to back in Jerusalem. They were being preached to, the ones that had been brought, one way or the other, and Daniel was pulling the strings and influencing things from the very, very highest levels there. One thing about this book is it's said to be apocalyptic literature, which means there's a lot of symbols, there's a lot of imagery. You always get that when you have a lot of visions, okay? So these visions that God sent are full of imagery and symbols, and we have to do a good job of determining what those mean. What New Testament book is just full of visions and imagery and symbols? Yes, Revelation. It comes to mind immediately. But in fact, there are many places in Revelation where something's going on and a vision is happening, and it's sort of like Ezekiel. It's very close to what happened in Ezekiel at one of the points there. But it's a little different, just a little different, but it's very much like it, and there's a lot of correspondence with it. God is communicating the same truths all those many years later, centuries later. I've heard people talk about apocalyptic literature, and they make it sound like the people are involved in it being what it is, the authors, the human authors, but that's not the case. Ezekiel did not ask for, he did not presume to invent or come up with a vision on his own. He was as surprised as anyone when the visions came to him. Same with John. He was on the Isle of Patmos and on the Lord's Day, and then all of a sudden he was having a vision. So God is the author of these visions. He's the author of these symbols. I had a brother one time that said, when I was teaching Ezekiel, and he said, Ezekiel sure had some weird ideas about what to do and about how to preach, and and I said, but look, brother, Ezekiel didn't decide. If you read the text, it says, and the word of the Lord came to me, saying, Son of man, and then whatever it was. I said, the Lord's doing this. And he said, well, Ezekiel put his own spin on things. Well, no, he didn't. He did exactly what he was told. And in fact, he's even quoted in the book as saying, and I did as I was commanded. He was very, very faithful in that. So what I'd like to do is go ahead and get started on the text. And one of the first things that I want to do is complain, if it's okay. Translations. I think it's safe to say that every translation from the original languages into English or any other modern language is to some extent a commentary. You can't get away from it. I mean, if you pick up a translation, the translators have to decide how they're going to bring this thought into the other language, and it's a judgment call, and they're trying to do the best they can. Okay, so there's a little bit of that going on, but sometimes it gets out of hand, and that's where I part ways with the text. By the way, please understand this about the ancient languages, like Koine Greek, all caps and no gaps. In other words, the way the text looks is it's just big, blocky, printed letters. They're run together so that there's no spaces in there, and it's all capital letters. So if everything's capitalized, nothing's capitalized. There is no difference between capital letters and small letters, and so I understand that without punctuation, there are differences in the way that we might choose to phrase some things, but it's not a deal breaker. God's word is true, and it is available, and we can have much confidence in it. But I do have a problem with some translations, and I was reminded of that in Ezekiel 1:1. In other words, I got all the way halfway through the first verse before I was reminded of what can be done. I'm using the New American Standard Version here. I'll read it in that. Now it came about in the 30th year. Nothing is said about that 30th year. It's just, it came about in the 30th year, on the 5th day of the 4th month, while I was by the river Chebar among the exiles, or the captivity, if you will. The heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God. Let me read what the International Standard Version has there. Instead of, now it came about in the 30th year, it says, the 30th year of the exile to Babylon. In other words, they're put words into the text that weren't there in the original language, and they're saying that 30 years is 30 years into the captivity. Well, actually, if you go back and look at the situation, that can't be true anyway. And then some other translations. The NIV says, in my 30th year. In other words, Ezekiel's saying, when I turned 30. Well, now, I believe that's right. But the text doesn't say that, and I'm not too sure I feel comfortable with a translation putting words in there that aren't in the original. The most honest way to do it is to footnote it, so you may have a translation, which footnotes that, and it may say in the 30th year, and then the footnote may suggest that it's in Ezekiel's 30th year, is a way to look at it. But I'm just saying translations can become commentaries if you're not careful. They all kind of have to be a little bit, but sometimes they really are. and don't get me started on commentaries. What did Marshall Keeble say about commentaries? They sure do shed a lot of, the Bible sure does shed a lot of light on those commentaries, I believe is what he said, okay? And that's true. So I would suggest that as we study, you and I both, the first thing we do is read a text in the biblical text and maybe look at 2 or 3 good translations and see maybe if there's some way that things are being said that we understand it a little more clearly. And maybe go to a commentary or 2 or 3 after we have thoroughly studied, and that would be the best way to go about it. Okay, let's continue on. All right, so Ezekiel has turned 30, and he's by the river Chebar among the exiles in Babylonia, and I saw visions of God, he says. And then verse 2, on the 5th of the month, in the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's exile, the word of the Lord came expressly to Ezekiel the priest, son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and there the hand of the Lord came upon him. You know, Levites, and he was one, entered service at age 30. Jesus began his public ministry at age 30. John the Baptizer began his public ministry at age 30. It's reasonable to understand that this happened with Ezekiel as well. God called him at that time that he called some others, certainly. And it seems to be a reasonable way of interpreting that. When we think about a vision, some have termed it to be a waking dream, but it's an audio-visual experience that an individual has that the others around him is not having. I'll give you some examples of that here a little later in the lesson, but when a vision occurs, a great truth is being revealed, or God is revealing his splendor, and he's trying to use that to strengthen someone that he's really got a tough job lined up for. In a vision, everything doesn't have meaning. Everything that is part of the vision doesn't have particular meaning always. Sometimes it's just part of the background scenery. In this vision we're about to look at, a lot of people have had some really bizarre ideas, but let's maybe concentrate on 4 things I'll suggest before we go on into it. The 4 living beings, these creatures, okay? The wheels, the expanse or the firmament, the platform on which the throne is, and then the throne itself, okay? All right, verse 4, and as I looked, behold, a storm wind was coming from the north, a great cloud with fire flashing forth continuously, and a bright light around it, and in its midst something like glowing metal in the midst of the fire. And within it there were figures resembling 4 living beings, and this was their appearance. They had human form. Each of them had 4 faces and 4 wings. And their legs were straight, and their feet were like a calf's hoof, and they gleamed like burnished bronze. Do you see what's going on here? This young priest, he's having a vision, and he's having a hard time describing it because he's never seen anything like this before. This is brand new. It's kind of like this. It's kind of like that. It's kind of like burnished bronze, and he's struggling to be able to record exactly what it was that he saw. Under their wings, verse 8, under their wings on their 4 sides were human hands. As for the faces and the wings of the 4 of them, their wings touched one another. Their faces did not turn when they moved. Each went straight forward. You know, if you got 4 faces, you can go in any of the cardinal directions, north, south, east, or west, without turning, because there's always a face pointed in any direction you are. He says, as for the form of their faces, each had the face of a man, all 4 had the face of a lion, on the right, and the face of a bull on the left, and the four had the face of an eagle. Such were their faces. Their wings were spread out above. Each had two touching one another, and two covering their bodies. And each went ahead straight forward. Whenever the Spirit was about to go, they would go without turning as they went. So whatever's going on with these creatures, and we're going to find out that they aren't by themselves. They form the base of what is going to be God's throne. But the idea is that they have the characteristics of these animals and of human being, and they're able to move effortlessly in any direction and at great speed, as we'll see in just a minute. Verse 13, in the midst of the living beings, there was something that looked like burning coals of fire, like torches darting back and forth among the living beings. The fire was bright, and lightning was flashing from the fire. And the living beings ran to and fro like bolts of lightning. How fast is lightning? Yeah, I think technically it's 186,000 miles per second for speed, speed of light, okay? Blink of an eye, or even less. All right, so the point is they could not only move in any direction without even bothering to turn instantaneously, but they moved as fast as lightning. They must have been darting about as Ezekiel looked at them. I think this is all going to mean something, but we got to kind of get on through it, okay? Now, as I looked at the living beings, behold, there was one wheel on the earth beside the living beings for each of the four of them. The appearance of the wheels and their workmanship was like sparkling beryl, and all of them had the same form, their appearance and workmanship being as if one wheel were within another. Whenever they moved in any of their four directions without turning as they moved. As for the rims, they were lofty and awesome, and the rims of all four of them, the wheels, if you will, were full of eyes round about. And whenever the living beings moved, the wheels moved with them, and whenever the living beings rose from the earth, the wheels rose also. Wherever the Spirit was about to go, they would go in that direction, and the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. Whenever those went, these went. Whenever those stood still, these stood still. Whenever those rose from the earth, the wheels rose close beside them, for the Spirit of the living beings was in the wheels. They were joined. Now, over the heads of the living beings, there was something like an expanse. Once again, it's like an expanse, okay? He's struggling here to explain what he's seeing. Like the awesome gleam of crystal extended over their heads, and under the expanse their wings were stretched out straight, one toward the other. Each one also had two wings covering their bodies on the one side and the other. I also heard the sound of their wings, like the sound of abundant waters as they went, like the voice of the Almighty, a sound of tumult like the sound of an army camp. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. And there came a voice from above the expanse that was over their heads. Whenever they stood still, they dropped their wings. Now above the expanse that was over their heads, there was something resembling a throne, like lapis lazuli in appearance, and on that which resembled a throne high up was a figure with the appearance of a man. Then I noticed from the appearance of his loins and upward something like glowing metal that looked like fire all around within it. And from the appearance of his loins and downward I saw something like fire, and there was a radiance around him. And as the appearance of the rainbow in the clouds on a rainy day, so was the appearance of the surrounding radiance, and such was the appearance of the likeness of the glory of the Lord. All right, we're getting to it now, the likeness of the glory of the Lord. And when I saw it, I fell on my face and heard a voice speaking. Well, we can understand if we had been there, if we had seen all this, I think we would have fallen on our face as well. It was a magnificent scene, and it was awesome, and it was one that certainly got Ezekiel's attention. This all happened very quickly. It took me a while to read what he was seeing. He saw it instantaneously. Then it takes about 6 or 8 minutes to read what he saw instantaneously. And then his reaction when he saw it, it was more than he could handle. It was overwhelming, and he fell on his face, as it were. And then he heard a voice speaking. Now, when we get to chapter 10, and we will soon enough, and it's part of the Jerusalem vision, we call it, we're going to see this same, some people have termed this thing we've just described, okay? It's like a throne on top of a platform, the gleaming, clear, or at least translucent platform. And then you've got the wheels within the wheels beside these 4 living creatures that form the basis of it. So it's quite the structure, and some have termed this the God chariot, okay? Well, I guess that'll work. Because it takes a while to describe it. Maybe we could just call it that. And this God chariot shows up again in the Jerusalem vision. And what we find out there is that the identification of these living creatures is they are cherubim. Okay. In chapter 10, Ezekiel says, "And when I saw them, I knew that they were cherubim." Before we get into the cherubim, let's take a look at the animals. I mean, we know man, right? Man is at least reasonably intelligent and crafty or whatever, and has certain attributes. But what about the eagle? What about the ox? What about the lion? So I'm going to say that most likely whatever God was trying to transmit in the way of information by using those faces on those living creatures is probably revealed by the way those animals were depicted in other scriptures. Speaking to eagles, 2 Samuel 1:23, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and pleasant in their life, and in their death they were not parted. They died the same day, okay, same battle. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. Okay, so eagles, the idea of fast, of swift, immediate, strength. Lions stronger than lions. Jeremiah 4:13, behold, he goes up like clouds, and his chariots like the whirlwind. His horses are swifter than eagles. Woe to us, for we are ruined. Okay, swifter than eagles. Lamentations 4:19. Our pursuers were swifter than the eagles of the sky. They chased us on the mountains. They waited for ambush, in ambush for us in the wilderness. So eagles, the idea of swiftness. Maybe that's what's being conveyed here by using the face of an eagle on these living creatures. Some other scriptures speaking to lions. Proverbs 28:1. The wicked flee when no one is pursuing, but the righteous are bold as a lion. Proverbs 30:30. The lion is mighty among beasts and does not retreat before any. Micah 5:8. And the remnant of Jacob will be among the nations, among many peoples, like a lion among the beasts of the forest, like a young lion among flocks of sheep, which, if he passes through, tramples down and tears, and there is none to rescue. So lions, fierce, bold, they don't retreat before any. The ox or bull, Deuteronomy 33:17. As the firstborn of his ox, majesty is his, and his horns are the horns of the wild ox. With him he shall push the peoples all at once to the ends of the earth. Psalm 22:12. Many bulls have surrounded me. The bulls of Bashan have encircled me. They open wide their mouth at me as a ravening and roaring lion. So the idea of strength with bulls. But what happens is when we get to chapter 10, we find out that these creatures weren't bulls or eagles or, lions. They were cherubim. So now we need to answer the next question, don't we? What are the cherubim? Does that sound like something we might want to get into? Okay. Let's take a look at the cherubim. That's plural, by the way. Cherub, singular, cherubim, plural. Now, if we went with modern culture, what would a cherub look like? That's right. Like on a Valentine's card or something, like a flying baby with a smile on his face and a bow and arrow, I think, to shoot arrows of love or whatever, okay? Well, that's popular culture, but it's fake and it's unreal and it's not what the cherubim are. They're powerful angels. They're considered to be, an order of angels. Isaiah described the seraphim, which are a little different, but okay. So the first instance where we hear about cherubim is Genesis 3:24. Okay. So he drove the man out. That's Adam being driven out of Eden. And at the east of the Garden of Eden, he stationed the cherubim and the flaming sword which turned every direction to guard the way to the tree of life. Okay? Powerful guards, if you will, of the Garden of Eden, back in Genesis 3. In Exodus 25, we read about how they are to make the ornamentation for the temple. And what they're supposed to do, well, actually, it'd be for the tabernacle, right? And then eventually it would be incorporated into the temple. Exodus 25:18, beginning, and you shall make 2 cherubim of gold. Make them of hammered work at the 2 ends of the mercy seat. And make 1 cherubim at one end, 1 cherubim at the other end. You shall make the cherubim of one piece with the mercy seat at its 2 ends. And the cherubim shall have their wings spread upward, covering the mercy seat with their wings and facing one another. The faces of the cherubim are to be turned towards the mercy seat. And then he goes on in verse 22 to say, and there I will meet with you from above the mercy seat, from between the 2 cherubim which are upon the ark of the testimony. I will speak to you about all that I will give you in commandment for the sons of Israel. So after that, God was typically referred to as he who is enthroned above the cherubim, okay? So 1 Samuel 4:4 mentions the people from Shiloh. They carried the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts who sits above the cherubim. And there's some other, in 1 Kings there's references to the temple, Solomon's temple that was being constructed, and they were to incorporate the cherubim into that. And so it mentions, and on the verse 29 of 1 Kings 7, and on the borders which were between the frames were lions, oxen, and cherubim. Where have we heard about those recently? Okay. And on the frames there was a pedestal above, and beneath the lions and oxen were wreaths of hanging work. See if you spot some other things we've been talking about. Now each stand had 4 bronze wheels with bronze axles, and its 4 feet had supports, and beneath the basin were cast supports with wreaths at each side. And the four wheels were underneath the borders, and the axles were on the stand, and the height of the wheel was 1.5 cubits. And it gives all these other things. And then finally in verse 36, and he engraved on the plates of its stays and on its borders cherubim, lions, and palm trees, according to the clear space on each. And so what we're seeing is the ornamentation in the tabernacle, which was a tent and moved about, and then eventually was incorporated into the temple for worship, Solomon's temple. We see these wheels, we see the cherubim, we see depictions of oxen and lions, okay? Much like what we see in this vision, okay? And what did we read about where the Lord is? He is enthroned above the cherubim. In Ezekiel's vision, where is God? He's enthroned above the cherubim. The cherubim were down there with the wheels, and then you had the expanse, and then you had God's throne. God's throne, God was enthroned above the cherubim. So I would suggest that the sense of the vision is it's as if God has invited, he has gone mobile, okay, and he has gone to Ezekiel, not the other way around, and his throne, he's still enthroned above the cherubim, but he brought them along with wheels, and he has gone to Ezekiel. All right. Psalm 80, verse 1. O give ear, shepherd of Israel, thou who dost lead Joseph like a flock, thou who art enthroned above the cherubim, shine forth. I mean, it just on and on and on. I've got several scriptures I could read, but time's getting away from us, so I don't think I will. But you see what's going on here. Things are kind of coming together in terms of what Ezekiel is seeing. Ezekiel is not going to the throne room of God in heaven. Even in the vision, he's not. Now, in the book of Revelation, John, the Apostle John, didn't he actually, in the vision, he was in heaven with God and with the Lamb and with the 24 elders worshiping around the throne and so forth. But here, it's as if God has decided to come to Ezekiel, and he's brought his throne room with him and all the things that would be there. We mentioned about this throne. I'd like to say a little more about that. This object that looked to Ezekiel like a throne on this firmament or expanse, this platform, if you will. Let's take a look at Exodus 24, verses 9 and 10. Then Moses and Aaron, Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel went up, and they saw the God of Israel. There was under his feet, as it were, a pavement of sapphire stone like the very heaven for clearness. Clear as the sky, but sapphire, kind of bluish tint to it. Sounds like this platform that Ezekiel's seeing in his vision. And then we could go to Revelation chapter 4 in the New Testament, and John, is told to to come up here, and I will show you what must take place after these things. Revelation 4 and 1. Immediately, he says, I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was standing in heaven, and one sitting on the throne. And then it describes the throne and the 24 elders sitting in their white garments and golden crowns on their head, and there were flashes of lightning from the throne and peals of thunder. And before the throne, in other words, the platform on which it was sitting, were like a sea of glass, like crystal, and in the center and around the throne, 4 living creatures full of eyes in front and behind. Well, that sounds a little bit like Ezekiel's experience too, right? In other words, 4 living creatures and eyes. Now, what's different about the eyes? Instead of, in this case, the 4 living creatures in Revelation 4 in the throne room, the 4 living creatures are full of eyes. But what was the situation with Ezekiel's? The wheels, the rims of the wheels were full of eyes. But I would suggest the meaning of the eyes is the same. What would you think the meaning of all those eyes is? God sees everything. Nothing is hidden from him. He don't miss much. Actually, he doesn't miss anything. You know, he's completely aware of all. Yes.
So in Ezekiel and Revelation, it mentions these 4 creatures. Would it be safe to assume that there's only 4?
I have no idea. If you don't know the answer, you're supposed to say, I have no idea. Go ahead.
I think you have to be just a little bit careful considering them as angels. Angels typically are messengers, or that's how they're considered.
That's right.
If you think about Lot, and the angels visited him to get him out of town, and the angels that visited the shepherds at Christ's birth, the cherubim never communicate. They're the palace guard. They're the symbols of strength and vision, and all of that is about guarding. And the cherubim that are carved and created for the temple, it's the same thing. They were shown as visions of guarding for God. They weren't the communicators.
Right. Yeah, we've got to be careful about making sure we are together on definitions. If by angels we mean not deity, not human, any beings that, you know,
Heavenly host.
yeah, any beings that aren't deity or humans, if we say that's angels, then they're angels. If we say angels are messengers, and they are, the cherubim don't seem to have a speaking role in being and performing in that way, then they aren't angels. And of course, yeah. Yeah, just not transmitting messages or whatever. So I don't know. We probably don't have enough information. But one thing's for sure, the word, well, our word angel is a transliteration of angelos from Greek, which is messenger. It means messenger. In Hebrew, it's malach, messenger. You know, so if an angel is an angelos or malach, then he's a messenger. Now, whether a cherubim qualifies or not, I don't know. Good question, though. Appreciate it. It's a bad class when there's no questions and you don't have any, you know, then you just have to sit here and listen to me.
Also, you know, if they're cherubim, they're in the same order as the seraphim. And that's their job, that's their work. They're not necessarily ones that go out and give the message. And so
Yeah.
you can attribute that to what their particular assignment is.
Yeah, Isaiah, the prophet Isaiah, who was prophesying about 120 years or so before Jeremiah and Ezekiel and Daniel, those gentlemen. And Isaiah prophesying to Judah, and of course he was one of the writing prophets, and we have a book with his name. And when he starts, the book of Isaiah starts with sermons. It's like Isaiah's powerful sermon. He comes out swinging. He comes out with his powerful sermons from the very beginning. And it's only in chapter 6 that he stops and tells the story of how he was recruited by God to be a prophet. And in Isaiah 6, beginning verse 1, in the year of King Uzziah's death, I saw the Lord sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings, not 4, 6. With 2 he covered his face, with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, 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 or that just means holiest. When you string the holies together like that, it means it's the superlative. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And then it talks about Isaiah's response to that, and he was horrified, and he felt like he was unclean and unworthy. And then in the vision, one of the seraphim got a coal from the fire and touched his lips, and that purified him. And of course, that would have simply burnt him badly if it had been real. This is a vision, okay? The vision is using symbology. So he was having a vision about this happening, and to Isaiah it would have been just as real as anything, but it was an audio-visual experience that was sent to him. And of course, Isaiah, being pronounced clean then, he said, then they asked, who shall go for us? Whom shall I send? Who will go for us? And then Isaiah, said, here am I, send me. I believe we got a song that sounds kind of like that. Okay. All right. So the seraphim, other heavenly creatures. But we've got a few minutes, so we need to pull some of this together. All right. So really what Ezekiel is experiencing is, for all that I see, he's experiencing God's throne room brought to him. What was Ezekiel at the time he had this vision? What was his job? What was he? He wasn't a prophet yet, but he was a priest. What was the highest role that a priest, the highest job that he could rise to, a priest in their system? High priest, okay? What could the high priest do that the other priests couldn't? He could go into the most holy place, the Holy of Holies, and how many times did he do that? Once a year, okay? And that's how restricted all this was. And in fact, those 2 cherubim that overshadowed the mercy seat there on the Ark of the Covenant were in the Holy of Holies, and even the high priest only saw that once per year. And he had to purify himself before he could go in and make purification for the people. Where would he have to be the high priest, Ezekiel? If he was going to be the high priest, if he ever made that, if he ever managed it, where would he have to be? He couldn't be in Babylonia, right? Where was the temple? Jerusalem. Okay. So he was in Babylonia. He was 500 miles away from Jerusalem as the crow flies, straight line distance, and you couldn't go that way because that's the empty quarter of Arabia and you would not make it, okay? So they had to go up the Euphrates River Valley and then go down through the mountains into Palestine, the Fertile Crescent, okay? And so it was a long journey, but he was way out of pocket. I guess the point I'm driving at is, even if he had not been deported to Babylonia, if he had stayed in Jerusalem and he had become the high priest eventually, even if all that, and that's the most that he could have ever have hoped for, he wouldn't have had what he had here with this vision and with all the interaction that he had with God. He wouldn't have had that. I mean, what were the chances that this priest would ever go back out of exile? Exile was, Jeremiah said, it's going to be 70 years. He said it more than once. It's going to be 70 years. Well, Ezekiel wasn't going to be going back. His chances of serving God in the way that he always thought he would as a priest, and he had been in training, okay, it was not there for him. I don't know what he was doing out there by the river Kabar when this vision came, but he might have been thinking, you know, I just turned 30, and I'm never going to be a priest like I thought I was going to be. And what am I going to do with my life? He could be a priest of sorts where he was, but not like he thought. He would never be in the temple rotation. He would never be serving God in the way that he had hoped. And then God came to him with a job. With this vision, everything changed. God brought the glory of his presence to Ezekiel. Ezekiel, no doubt, had given up ever being able to serve in the way that he wanted to, but God came to him, and God's throne was on wheels, okay? Now, it's not like God's throne is really on wheels. It's not, this is a vision, but it's to show the splendor, the majesty of God, and to make some strong points, and one of those points is God is not a located God of a particular land. That was the thinking. That was the thinking back then. If you were in Egypt, you better worship Ra, the sun god. If you were, in Ammon or Moab, you better worship Chemosh and those abominable gods of the Moabites and the Ammonites. You worship the God of the land because the gods were located. That's the thinking that was there. And the idea is, Ezekiel, you're not anywhere near Jerusalem, but God can come to you. God is here. You're not out of pocket. God is not a located God. He's with his people. So he ended up coming into God's presence in a way that he never imagined. And of course, for anyone who is having a vision, it is as if it is as real as anything could possibly be. Paul had a vision, didn't he? Now Paul claimed that, he started off by saying, I thought, wow, that heating system sure is strong. Well, it's gone as quickly as it came up, right? But Ezekiel, was shown things that he never thought he would see. Paul, he was being modest when he said he knew a man who 14 years ago was, caught up to the third heaven. That would be God's dwelling place. And he saw things that he couldn't even speak of, that were forbidden for man to speak. And, but it changed him, and this vision changed Ezekiel. But as Scott let us know a couple of weeks ago, this great service that he was given, this young prophet, it came at a great cost, didn't it? In many ways, not the least of which was the situation with his wife. But it's what he wanted to do. He wanted to serve his God, and that way he was able to do so. We've got a few more minutes, so we'll get started on chapter 2. Chapter 2, he says, "Then he said to me, Son of man, stand on your feet, that I may speak with you." Now, where is Ezekiel right now before when this is being said? Face down, okay? Face down. So, Son of man, stand on your feet that I may speak with you. And as he spoke to me, the Spirit entered me and set me on my feet, and I heard him speaking to me. Okay, so this voice is telling him to stand that he may speak with him. This is God. But he knew that he couldn't. His strength was gone. He was overwhelmed. And so the Spirit entered him and set him on his feet. And that reminded me of Daniel, and so I'll go ahead and take a quick look. My point is this: other men had encountered, an angel or the Lord in a vision or whatever, and reacted the same way. Daniel 10, verse 4. And on the 24th day of the first month, while I was by the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, there was a certain man dressed in linen, whose waist was girded with a belt of pure gold of Uphaz. His body also was like beryl. His face had the appearance of lightning. His eyes were like a flaming torch. His arms and feet like the gleam of polished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a tumult. Now I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, while the two men who were with me did not see the vision. Nevertheless, a great dread fell on them, and they ran away to hide themselves. And then it talks about how he basically passed out. He went into a deep sleep. He was overwhelmed. He was overcome. And then in verse 10, and then behold, a hand touched me and set me trembling on my hands and knees. God got him up on his all fours, but he didn't stand him up. And then he said, now stand upright. I'm about to tell you, I've been sent to you. And then Daniel says, I stood up trembling. The same thing happened with the Apostle John when he had the vision about the Son of Man clothed in a robe reaching to his feet. His hair was like white wool, like snow. His eyes were like a flame of fire. This was Jesus, a vision of Jesus. And John says in verse 17, when I saw him, I fell at his feet as a dead man. And he laid his right hand upon me, saying, do not be afraid. I am the first and the last. That would be the Alpha and the Omega, and the living one. And I was dead, and behold, I'm alive forevermore. So these experiences are overwhelming. And Ezekiel's experience was no different. And then in verse 3, then he said to me, Son of man, basically he's saying human, okay? Son of man, I am sending you to the sons of Israel, to a rebellious people who have rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me to this very day. And I am sending you to them who are stubborn and obstinate children. And you shall say to them, thus says the Lord God, as for them, whether they listen or not, for they are a rebellious house, they will know that a prophet has been among them. God's saying eventually they're going to know a prophet's been among them. How will they know a prophet has been among them? Any prophet has been. How do you know you got a real prophet? They come true. Yeah, if a prophet speaks the truth and it comes to pass, that's how you know you got a prophet. And God is saying what you're going to speak, basically, is going to come to pass, and they will know that a prophet has been among them. And then he says, and you, son of man, neither fear them, nor fear their words, though thistles and thorns are with you, and you sit on scorpions. Neither fear their words, nor be dismayed at their presence, for they are a rebellious house. But you shall speak my words to them, whether they listen or not, for they are rebellious. Now you, son of man, listen to what I am speaking to you. Do not be rebellious like that rebellious house. and we'll go ahead and stop it right there in mid-sentence. But you see, God has had problems with prophets before. Jeremiah had to be taken to the woodshed to get straightened out. You know, he started saying things he shouldn't say, and God gave him the lecture and the challenge that he needed. God seems to be getting ahead of that with Ezekiel. He's going ahead and warning him up front. Look, don't you be like those rebellious people. You know, I need you to be my man and bring my message. So we'll leave it at that and come back to it next week. Thank you.